Are you a second chance renter? Do you have a criminal record, or do you have a history of a broken lease or an eviction? If so, you've come to the right place. I am Jack, the apartment guru, and I've run apartments for 33 years, including thousands of apartments. In this episode, I'm going to give you a lot of pointers on how you can improve your chances of renting an awesome apartment, even if you are a second chance renter. In previous episodes, I've given a lot of other pointers on how to rent the best apartment for you and your family without breaking the bank.
In episode 7, I explained why good apartment complexes check criminal records, and in episode 9, I explained how I decide to make an exception and rent to someone who does have a criminal record. In this episode, I will discuss things you can do to increase your chances of overcoming blemishes on your record, whether they be criminal convictions, broken leases, or evictions. First, the most important thing you can do, and I know this sounds stupidly simple, but it's super important, is be nice to the staff at the apartment complex. Being nice is important whether you have blemishes on your record or not, but it's especially important if you do have blemishes. Excuse my French here, but nobody wants to deal with an asshole. This is doubly true if you have blemishes on your record. But if you're beyond nice, the leasing staff will consider going to bat for you and asking the apartment manager to make an exception. If you are an asshole, the leasing person will just tell you, sorry, we don't accept people who have a criminal record or eviction or broken lease or whatever. Second, dress nicely, smell good, carry yourself well. Whether we like it or not, first impressions count, and we never have a second chance to make a first impression. Third, do what they ask you to do. If they want to make a copy of your ID before showing you an apartment, which is a very common request, hand over your ID and say, sure, here you go. If they give you a paper to fill out, which is a bad leasing technique in my opinion, but it happens often, fill out the paper with a smile on your face. You want the leasing person to like you. She will not go to bat for you if you mistreat or disrespect the leasing agent. Keep in mind, she did not make the rules she's asking you to follow. Don't give her a hard time. Fourth, do not lie. Although you might get away with a lie sometimes, the best properties are pretty good at checking for broken leases, evictions, and criminal records. I can tell you right now that there are plenty of prospects I might have made an exception for, but I didn't make that exception because they lied to me. No, I've never been evicted, and then we find out that they have an eviction. Fifth, while most evictions are the fault of the person being evicted, sometimes the eviction was truly outside the person's control. I remember quite a few such cases. For example, I remember a recent case where a woman's husband was the sole breadwinner. She was taking care of 2 young kids, and the husband got into a fight and went to jail. The woman quickly got a job, but it took a few weeks for her to get her first paycheck, and she could only pay half the rent with that paycheck. We were able to confirm that the property where she lived was not willing to work with her and evicted her. This was both heartless and stupid, because by the time they evicted her, she could have paid her rent in full, but they couldn't be bothered. In my book, she had demonstrated such spirit and determination under these very tough circumstances, managing to get and hold down a job with 2 young kids, that I made an exception for her, and she turned out to be an awesome resident. But here is the opposite example of someone we evicted for whom I would never make an exception. During COVID, this lady applied and obtained $4,980 in free rent assistance from Harris County. She was under eviction with us, and they gave her this money so she could pay the $2,000 or so that she already owed us and pay 3 months of rent in advance. But this lady kept the $4,980 for herself. She didn't pay us a dime, and we evicted her. If someone with that story was applying to rent at the property that I run, and I can tell you many of the people who got evicted during COVID had a story similar to this lady, check out the next story, I would never make an exception for that person. Here's another story during COVID. This lady stopped paying her rent during COVID because she thought she couldn't be evicted. But the law had an exception. People could be evicted if they didn't make best efforts to pay whatever amount they could afford. So to find out what this lady could afford to pay, we asked her to provide her bank statements to us, which she did voluntarily. It turned out her mother had died some months before, and this lady had inherited $10,000. In addition, this lady was still working. She didn't lose her job during COVID. As the judge pointed out when we appeared in front of him on the eviction, there was absolutely no reason for this lady to stop paying her rent. He also was very curious about her spending well over $1,000 each month on restaurant and liquor store bills, as well as tons of DoorDash deliveries. He granted the eviction, and obviously, I would never make an exception for someone in eviction like this. To summarize, if you did your best to avoid eviction but got evicted anyway, I would make an exception for you. If you could have paid your rent but chose not to, I would not make an exception. It's really that simple. As to broken leases, the most common exceptions I make there is if the prospect can provide a very good reason for breaking the lease. I remember a lady whose ex-boyfriend had abused her, and she moved away from him and went to live at a luxury apartment complex that assured her he would not bother her there because the property was fenced and gated and they had off-duty Houston police officers patrolling the property. Well, the ex-boyfriend found out where she was living, and he had no problem getting into the luxury apartment complex. He just followed another car right through those gates into the property, went to her apartment, and harassed her. All of this despite the fact that she had gotten a restraining order against him. Lucky for her, a neighbor heard the commotion and intervened, and the ex-boyfriend left. But this lady was just too traumatized to stay there and asked the apartment manager to let her out of her lease. The manager refused, so she broke her lease and left. She discovered our property and was completely sold because we have a guardhouse that is staffed 24/7, 365, and we have 50 high-resolution video cameras all over the place. So even though she had a broken lease, I made an exception for her. This story has a crazy ending. Can you guess what it is? I'll give you a minute or two to think about it. If you guess that the ex-boyfriend found her again, give yourself a star. And if you guess that he showed up at our guardhouse one day, give yourself another star. But the guardhouse attendants were totally ready for this guy. You see, the lady was sure he would try to come in, so she provided his picture and the description of the car he would be driving, as well as a copy of the restraining order against him. His picture and car description were posted in the guardhouse, and all the guardhouse attendants had been trained on what to do when he showed up. Well, when he did show up, he said he was visiting some apartment, and the attendant told him she would have to call that apartment to make sure they were ready for him. She asked him to wait while she made the call, and she did make a call to 911. The beat cops were also aware of this situation, so they showed up within a few minutes and carted him off to jail for twice violating the restraining order. He never bothered her again. So to summarize, If you have a valid reason for breaking your lease, I will make an exception. If you don't, we won't make an exception because it is likely you will break the lease you signed with us. Now that we have discussed evictions and broken leases, let me get back to additional advice for those persons who have a criminal conviction. In addition to the first 5 pieces of advice I already discussed, there are a few extra pointers I want to share here. Before we get to those pointers, let me just remind you of what I advised before. Do not lie by denying a criminal history. I will never make an exception for someone who's lying to me, and we almost always figure out who is lying to us. And by the way, if the leasing staff never asks you about a criminal record, you might want to think twice about living at that property, because if they didn't ask you about your criminal record, they didn't ask their other tenants either, which means that criminals are living at that property, which is something you definitely don't want. Now to the pointers. First, it goes without saying, once you're out of jail, do not commit another crime. While some properties, such as ours, will make an exception for one criminal conviction in certain cases, that is almost impossible to do if you are a repeat offender for the reasons we discussed in episode 7. Second, the moment you get out of jail, get a job, any job, even if you're way overqualified for the job. If that means being a dishwasher or carpenter helper or ditch digger or whatever, so be it. Show up to work every day, rain or shine. This will both put money in your bank account and show a future landlord that you are a reliable person. Do not switch jobs willy-nilly. Landlords like to see stability, and switching jobs every couple of months suggests you might have a problem getting along with people, which may or may not be the case. Of course, if you get a nice promotion, switching to the new job makes sense. Third, the first apartment complex that accepts you may not be the greatest, but the best places generally won't take you straight out of jail. But if you can get in someplace, even if it's a room in a house or a small cottage in the back of a property, take it. Fourth, make sure you sign a written lease. Pay your rent every month on time and in a way that leaves a paper trail. If you will be paying by money order, keep all the receipts and stubs of the money orders. If by check, keep your bank statements. Try not to pay in cash, and whatever you do, do not ever pay late. Fifth, be extra nice to your landlord and to any other renters. In fact, be nice to everyone around you at work, out at the store, etc. Remember, whether you like it or not, society still sees you as a bad person. Make sure you prove everybody wrong and show them you're an awesome person every day. Sixth, read your lease and follow the rules in the lease. You may think the rules are stupid, but you signed the contract. You need to follow it if you want to get a good reference from the first place you're renting at after getting out of jail. And remember, that first rental after getting out of jail is your ticket to success on future and nicer rentals. And when you leave your first apartment, make sure you leave it in great shape so that you can get your deposit back. Once you do the above for a year or two, you will probably be able to get a better job that pays more and probably be able to rent a nicer place as well. This will be easier because when they ask for a rental reference, you will have one and it'll be an excellent one. And when they ask for a job reference, you will have that too. Thanks for watching. I hope this video has been helpful to you. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and watch my other videos as well. If you subscribe below, you'll be notified every time I drop a new video, and I usually drop 1 or 2 videos every week or so. And if you have a question, Please leave it in the comments and I will answer your question in a future video. The dog you see here knows there are no shortcuts to finding an apartment, and he is out and about looking for the best place to call home. I will see you again in my next video, but until then, happy apartment hunting!